The key to my grandfather's beach condo should have turned, but instead, a stranger opened the door and told me they had owned the place for 6 months. I drove straight to the county clerk and pulled the title record. There it was. A quitclaim deed transferring the property to my parents' holding company, signed in my name. I stared at the forgery, realizing my parents had stolen my inheritance and erased my existence for a quick profit. The light from my laptop screen was the only thing illuminating my living room in Fairmont Heights. It was 11 at night on a Tuesday. While the rest of the city was winding down or sleeping, I was still formatting a slide deck for a client who would likely skim it for 30 seconds before asking me to change the font color. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, lighting up with a notification from Instagram. It was a post from my mother, Linda Reed. The photo was professional quality, likely taken by the family photographer they kept on retainer. It showed my parents standing on either side of my younger brother, Eric. They were holding crystal flutes of champagne, beaming with the kind of aggressive pride that usually signals a financial transaction has just occurred. The caption read, "So incredibly proud of our visionary son Eric for closing his Series A funding round. The Reed legacy continues to innovate. Proud parents. Tech. Future family first." I stared at the image. Eric looked confident, his smile practiced and bright. My father, Charles, had his hand firmly on Eric's shoulder, a gesture of ownership as much as affection. I tapped the heart icon out of habit, a reflexive muscle memory of being the good, supportive daughter, and then I put the phone face down. I was 32 years old. I had a mid-level job as a marketing analyst that I had secured entirely on my own, paying rent on an apartment that was perfectly adequate, but certainly not part of the Reed legacy. I drove a sedan that was 6 years old. I paid my own insurance, and I knew, without needing to ask, that the check my parents had written to anchor Eric's funding round was likely more than I would earn in the next 10 years combined. It was not that I wanted their money. I had stopped wanting things from Charles and Linda Reed a long time ago because the price tag was always too high. The currency they dealt in was control, and Eric was welcome to it. But the ache of being the invisible Reed, the background character in their curated life, never quite went away. I closed my laptop and rubbed my eyes. The silence of the apartment felt heavy. Growing up, the narrative had been established early. Eric was the golden child, the one with the spark, the one who needed resources to fan his flames. I was Sarah. Sarah was sensible. Sarah was sturdy. Sarah could handle herself. I remembered being 10 years old, standing in the kitchen with a permission slip for a science camp I desperately wanted to attend. It cost $400. My father had barely looked up from his newspaper, telling me that things were a little tight that month because they were investing in a private tennis coach for Eric, who showed real promise. You understand, do you not, Sarah? He had said, Eric needs this more. You are smart enough to learn from books. I had nodded. I always nodded. I learned early that being dramatic or demanding only earned me a cold stare and a lecture on gratitude. So I became quiet. I became competent. I became the daughter who did not need anything. And eventually, they stopped offering. The only person who ever saw through the performance was my grandfather. I picked up my phone again, ignoring the Instagram notification, and scrolled back to my last call log. Henry Reed, we had spoken 3 days ago. Sarah, he had rasped, his voice sounding thinner than usual. Are you eating enough? You sound tired. I am fine. Grandpa? I had lied. Just work. You work too hard. He had told me. You get that from me. Unfortunately, your father never worked a day in his life. He just moved money around until it looked like work. I had laughed. It was our secret language. Henry Reed was the source of the family wealth. A man who had built a construction business from nothing, pouring concrete and framing houses until his back gave out. He was rough around the edges. Unimpressed by the country club memberships my parents collected like Boy Scout badges. He was the only person who called me just to hear my voice. He remembered my deadlines. He knew the name of my cat. He knew that I hated cilantro and that I loved the smell of rain on hot asphalt. To my parents, I was a demographic: single, female, employed, non-priority. To Henry, I was just Sarah. "I need to see you. Sarah," he had said at the end of that call. "Can you come down to Seabrook this weekend? Just you? Do not tell Charles." The urgency in his voice had stuck with me. Seabrook Shores was a 2-hour drive from the city, a coastal town that had managed to retain a bit of its gritty, fishing village charm despite the encroachment of luxury condos. My grandfather owned a unit in a building called Ocean Crest Towers. It was not the flashiest building on the Strip. It was built in the 80s, a solid block of concrete and stucco that faced the Atlantic with a stubborn defiance. The condo was my sanctuary. It smelled of old paper, salt air, and the peppermint tea my grandfather drank by the gallon. It was the only place in the world where I felt I could exhale completely. I drove down on a Saturday morning, the gray sky reflecting my mood. When I unlocked the door to Unit 4B, the familiar scent washed over me, loosening the knot of tension that lived permanently between my shoulder blades. Henry was sitting in his recliner facing the sliding glass doors. The ocean was churning, gray waves capping with white foam. He did not turn around immediately when I walked in. "Grandpa?" I said softly. He turned then, and my heart gave a painful squeeze. He looked smaller than he had a month ago. His skin was like parchment, translucent and fragile, stretched over high cheekbones, but his eyes, pale blue and sharp, were the same. "Sarah," he said, smiling. "There she is." I went to him and kissed his cheek. He smelled of soap and tobacco, a habit he had technically quit 20 years ago but still clung to in spirit. "I made tea," he said, gesturing to the pot on the small dining table. "Sit. We need to talk." I poured 2 cups and sat across from him. The condo was tidy, but clutter was creeping in at the edges. Stacks of mail on the counter, a pile of books by the sofa. It felt like the home of someone who was getting tired of maintaining order. "How are you feeling?" I asked, like a rusted car that is out of oil. He grunted. "But my head is clear. That is what matters." He took a sip of tea, his hand trembling slightly. The cup clattered against the saucer when he set it down. "Your father was here last week," he said. "Linda, too." I stiffened. They rarely visited him unless they wanted something, usually a signature on a trust document or approval for some new investment strategy involving the family estate. "What did they want?" I asked. "Same as always," Henry said, looking out at the ocean. "They want to simplify things, consolidate. They think I am too old to manage my own affairs. They kept putting papers in front of me, talking fast. You know how Linda gets. She talks so fast you forget what you're agreeing to." A cold prickle of alarm went down my spine. "Did you sign anything?" Henry sighed. A long, rattling sound. "I signed some things. Transfer of management for the construction holdings. Some power of attorney updates for the medical stuff. They wore me down. Sarah, I am 84 years old. I just wanted them to stop talking so I could take a nap." He looked at me, and the vulnerability in his expression broke my heart. This was the man who had built skyscrapers, who had commanded crews of 200 men. Now he was being bullied by his own son and daughter-in-law because he was too tired to fight. "But I did not sign everything," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He reached down beside his chair and picked up a manila folder. It was plain, unassuming, with no label. He pushed it across the table toward me. "Open it," he said. I opened the folder. Inside was a single document, stapled at the top. It was thick, printed on heavy legal paper. I read the title, Quitclaim Deed. I scanned the legalese, my marketing brain struggling to switch gears to legal terminology. Grantor, Henry J. Reed. Grantee, Sarah E. Reed. Property description, Unit 4B, Ocean Crest Towers, Seabrook Shores. I looked up at him, my mouth slightly open. "Grandpa?" "I own this place free and clear," Henry said firmly. "I bought it with cash in 1982 before your father met Linda. Before the business got incorporated into all those trusts and LLCs. It is the one thing I have that is just mine. And now, it is yours." I looked back at the paper. I saw his signature at the bottom, shaky but distinct, dated 3 days ago. Below it was the stamp and signature of a notary public I did not recognize. "I cannot take this," I said, panic rising in my throat. "Mom and Dad will be furious. They consider this a family asset. They use it for weekends. They use it to impress their friends." Henry spat. "They do not care about this place. They care about the address. They care about the property value. To them, it is just a line item on a balance sheet." He leaned forward, reaching across the table to cover my hand with his. His skin was cool and dry. "Sarah, listen to me. You are the only one who actually loves this place. You are the only one who comes here to watch the ocean, not to check the stock market on your phone. I want you to have one thing that is just yours. One thing they cannot touch. One thing that gives you a place to breathe." Tears pricked my eyes, but if they find out, they will not find out until I'm gone. Henry said, "And by then, it will not matter. The deed is signed and notarized. I am giving it to you now. It is done. You take this. You record it when you are ready, or you just keep it safe. But it is yours." He reached into the folder and pulled out a smaller white envelope. It was sealed. I also wrote a letter. He said, "I left a copy with my attorney, Alan Morris, not Martin Cole. I do not trust Martin. He is in your father's pocket. Alan is old school. He has the original will and a copy of this deed. And he has a letter from me stating my clear intent that this condo is a gift to you, separate from the estate, just in case there is confusion." Confusion was a polite word for the World War III that Charles and Linda Reed would unleash if they knew about this. "I promise," I said, my voice shaking. "I promise I will take care of it. Hide it." "Sarah," he said, his eyes intense, "do not tell your brother. Do not tell your mother. Put it in a safe place. When I die, they are going to descend like vultures. They will strip the carcass clean. I want to know that you have a nest egg, a safety net." I nodded, closing the folder. I felt the weight of the secret settling onto my shoulders, heavy and terrifying, but also incredibly warm. He had chosen me, for the first time in my life. I was not the afterthought. I was the priority. "Thank you, Grandpa," I whispered. He smiled, and for a moment, he looked 20 years younger. "Let us not get mushy, kid. Go make me another cup of tea. And put some whiskey in it this time. Do not tell your mother that either." We spent the rest of the afternoon watching the waves. We did not talk much. We did not need to. I drove back to Fairmont Heights that evening with the folder tucked under the passenger seat, checking my rearview mirror every few miles, as if my parents could somehow see through the trunk of my car. When I got home, I put the deed in the fireproof lockbox I kept under my bed. It sat there next to my birth certificate and my passport. I touched the paper one last time before locking the box. It felt like holding a grenade, but it also felt like holding a key to a prison cell I had not realized I was living in. 3 weeks later, I was in a meeting about quarterly social media engagement when my phone buzzed. It was my father. He never called during the workday. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Hello?" "Sarah." My father's voice was clipped, efficient. "It is your grandfather. He had a massive stroke this morning. You need to come to the hospital." I drove to the hospital in a blur, running red lights, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. When I arrived, the room was already crowded. Charles was on his phone in the corner, talking about rescheduling a board meeting. Linda was talking to a doctor, her voice pitched in that specific tone of concerned authority she used when she wanted to speak to a manager. Eric was sitting in a chair looking uncomfortable, checking his watch. Henry was in the bed. He was unconscious, hooked up to a dozen machines that beeped and hissed. He looked so small. The vitality I had seen in him just weeks ago was gone, replaced by the gray pallor of the dying. I pushed past my mother and went to the bedside. I took his hand. It was limp. "Grandpa?" I whispered. "He is not conscious." "Sarah," my mother said, Not unkindly, but with a distracted air. "The doctors say there is extensive bleeding in the brain. It is just a matter of time." I ignored her. I squeezed his hand, hoping for a squeeze back. A twitch. Anything. There was nothing. I stayed there for 12 hours. My parents came and went, getting coffee, making calls, managing the logistics of death before death had even occurred. Eric left after an hour, mumbling something about a developer meeting he could not miss. I sat there and held Henry's hand until the heat went out of it. When the machines finally flatlined, producing that singular high-pitched tone that marks the end of a world, my father looked at his watch. 9:14, he said. He stepped out to tell the nurse. My mother sighed, smoothing her skirt. "Well," she said, "he had a long life. We have a lot to do. Charles, we need to call the funeral home immediately if we want to get the Saturday slot." I sat there, still holding the dead hand of the only person who had ever truly loved me, and I felt a cold, hard stone form in the center of my chest. They were not mourning him, they were processing him. The funeral was a masterpiece of Reed family branding. It was held at the largest cathedral in the city, a place Henry had visited maybe twice in his life. The flowers were white lilies, tasteful and expensive. The eulogies were delivered by local politicians and business partners who spoke about Henry's contribution to the city's skyline, his tenacity, his legacy. My father spoke for 20 minutes about standing on the shoulders of giants. My mother dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief at appropriate intervals. Eric stood stoically, looking the part of the grieving grandson, receiving condolences from investors who patted his back and murmured about his startup. I sat in the front row, numb. I had written a eulogy, but my mother had cut it from the program the night before. "It is a bit too personal. Sarah," she had said, "we need to focus on his professional achievements. There will be important people there. We want to project strength." So I sat in silence. I watched them bury him in a mahogany casket that cost more than my car, knowing he would have hated it. He would have wanted a pine box and a wake at the local pub. After the burial, there was a reception at my parents' estate. Caterers circulated with shrimp cocktails. People drank expensive scotch and talked about interest rates. I stood in a corner, clutching a glass of water, feeling like a ghost at my own grandfather's funeral. 2 days later, we gathered at the office of Martin Cole for the reading of the will. Martin was a slick man with silver hair and a suit that cost $3,000. He sat behind a mahogany desk that was wider than my dining table. My parents sat in leather armchairs, looking solemn but expectant. Eric was texting under the table. I sat on the edge of the sofa, my hands folded in my lap. I was nervous. The deed was still in my lockbox. I had not mentioned it to anyone. I kept waiting for the right moment. But the moment never came. Now, I figured, it would all come out. Martin cleared his throat and began to read. It was a standard. Boilerplate will, a few charitable bequests to the hospital and the university, a lump sum for his longtime housekeeper, and then the bulk of the estate, all remaining assets, real and personal, including all stocks, bonds, and business interests, are to be poured over into the Henry J. Reed Family Trust, to be administered by Charles Reed and Linda Reed as co-trustees, for the benefit of his descendants, to be distributed at the trustees' discretion. I waited. I waited to hear the words, "except for the property located at Ocean Crest Towers." I waited for a specific mention of the condo. Martin kept reading. He droned on about tax liabilities and administrative powers. Finally, he closed the folder. "That concludes the reading of the last will and testament," he said. My father nodded, satisfied, straightforward. Just as we discussed with him last year, my mother looked at me and Eric. "Basically, everything goes into the family pot," she explained. "Your father and I will manage it. We will make sure everyone is taken care of." "Of course." I frowned. "What about the condo?" I asked. The room went silent. My father turned to look at me, his eyes narrowing slightly. "The condo is part of the estate. Sarah," he said, "it is an asset. It goes into the trust, but—" I started. then stopped. If I mentioned the deed now, it would look like I was trying to pull a fast one. They would ask why I had not brought it up sooner. They would ask where I got it. And if the will said, all assets, did that override the deed? I did not know enough about the law. And Henry had said, separate from the estate. If he had already signed the deed to me, then technically, the condo was not his when he died. It was not part of the estate. It was mine. The will could not give away something he did not own anymore. I decided to stay quiet, if I brought it up now, in front of Martin Cole and my parents. It would be a fight. I was exhausted. I was grieving. I did not have the energy to explain the secret visit, the folder, the whisper in the kitchen. I assumed, with a naive and dangerous confidence, that the piece of paper in my lockbox was ironclad. It was notarized. It was signed. It was real. Let them play their games with the trust. I had the deed. Okay, I said quietly. I just wondered. My mother smiled. A tight, dismissive expression. Do not worry about the details. Sarah, we will handle the heavy lifting. You just focus on your job. We left the office. My parents went to a lunch reservation. Eric went back to his startup. I went back to my apartment, crawled into bed, and cried for 3 hours. In the months that followed, I was swallowed by the gray fog of grief. Work became a relentless grind. My boss was pushing for a promotion that I no longer cared about. I spent my weekends sleeping or staring at the wall. I avoided my parents, sending their calls to voicemail more often than not. I thought about the condo every day. I thought about driving down to Seabrook, unlocking the door, and sitting in Henry's chair. But every time I planned to go, something stopped me. It felt too final. Going there would mean acknowledging that he was really gone. As long as I stayed away, I could pretend he was just waiting for me. That the tea was still warm, that the smell of tobacco and salt was still lingering in the air. And there was a part of me that was afraid. Afraid that if I went down there, I would find my parents there, measuring the drapes or talking about renovations. I was not ready to defend my sanctuary. So I waited. I checked the lockbox once a week. The deed was still there. The paper was tangible, real. I told myself there was no rush. The condo was mine. It wasn't going anywhere. My grandfather had given it to me. He had made sure of it. I told myself I would go in the summer. Then the summer passed. I told myself I would go in the fall. It was almost a year later when the burnout finally broke me. I snapped at a client over a font choice. I started having panic attacks in the grocery store. I knew I needed to get away. I needed Seabrook. I requested 3 days off work. I packed a suitcase. I took the deed out of the lockbox, just in case, and put it in my carry-on bag. I drove down on a Friday afternoon. The traffic was light. As I crossed the bridge into Seabrook shores, the smell of the ocean hit me, and for the first time in 12 months, I felt my lungs expand fully. I pulled into the parking lot of Ocean Crest Towers. The building looked the same. The white stucco was a little weathered, the palm trees swaying in the breeze. I parked in Henry's spot, space 4B. I grabbed my bag and walked to the front door. I rode the elevator up to the 4th floor, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm of anticipation. I was coming home. I walked down the hallway to Unit 4B. I stood in front of the door, taking a deep breath. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the key Henry had given me years ago, the one with the faded plastic cover. I slid the key into the lock. It did not turn. I frowned. I jiggled it. Maybe the lock was stiff. It had been a year. I tried again. I pulled the key out and put it back in. It hit the back of the cylinder, but it would not rotate. A cold feeling started to spread in my stomach. I stepped back and looked at the number on the door. 4B. It was definitely the right apartment. I knocked. Maybe the building manager was inside doing maintenance. I waited. I knocked again. Harder this time. Footsteps. The peephole darkened. Then, the sound of a deadbolt sliding back. The door opened. A woman stood there. She was about my age, wearing yoga pants and a t-shirt. She held a glass of white wine. Behind her, I could see a man sitting on the sofa. My grandfather's sofa. watching a football game on a massive new television that definitely had not been there before. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, looking at me with polite confusion. I stared at her. My brain was misfiring, trying to process the visual data that did not match my reality. The painting in the hallway was gone. The smell of tobacco was gone, replaced by a vanilla-scented candle. I think there is a mistake," I stammered. "My key does not work." The woman's expression shifted from confusion to wariness. She glanced back at the man on the sofa. "Jason?" The man stood up and walked over. He was tall, wearing a polo shirt. "Who is it?" "She says her key does not work," the woman said. The man looked at me, then at the suitcase in my hand. "I am sorry," he said, his voice firm but not aggressive. "You must have the wrong unit. This is our place." "No," I said, my voice sounding high and thin. "This is Unit 4B, Henry Reed's condo. I am his granddaughter." The couple exchanged a look. It was a look of pity, mixed with annoyance. "The previous owner?" the man said. "We bought this place 6 months ago." The world tilted on its axis. The hallway seemed to stretch and warp. "Bought it?" I whispered. "That is impossible. We closed in October," the woman said, stepping a little closer to the man, as if I might be dangerous. "We bought it from an investment company. Seabrook Coastal something." "No," I said again, louder this time. "My grandfather gave it to me. I have the deed." I reached for my bag, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the zipper. "Look, miss," the man said, stepping forward to block the doorway. "I do not know what to tell you. We have the title. We have the keys. We live here. If you have an issue, you need to talk to the building manager. But you cannot be here." He started to close the door. "Wait," I cried, lunging forward. "You do not understand." The door clicked shut. The deadbolt slid home with a heavy, final thud. I stood there in the hallway, staring at the wood grain of the door. The silence of the corridor was deafening. My grandfather's condo, my sanctuary, my one thing, sold. I turned and ran to the elevator, my suitcase bouncing behind me. I practically fell into my car. My hands were shaking so hard, I dropped my phone twice before I could unlock it. I did not call my parents. I knew, with a sickening, visceral certainty, that calling them would be useless. I opened the browser on my phone. My fingers flew across the screen, typing in the URL for the Seabrook County Clerk's office. I had used it before for work research. I knew how to navigate the public records search. Search by address. 1400 Ocean Boulevard. Unit 4B. The results loaded on the small screen. Owner: Amanda and Jason Marsh. Sale. Date: October 14th, 2025. Sale price: $650,000. I scrolled down to the history. Grantor: Seabrook Coastal Investments, LLC. Grantee: Amanda and Jason Marsh. I scrolled further back. Grantor: Reed Family Holdings, LLC. Grantee: Seabrook Coastal Investments, LLC. Date: September 2nd, 2025. And then, the entry before that. Grantor: Sarah E. Reed. Grantee: Reed Family Holdings, LLC. Document type: Quitclaim deed. Date recorded: August 15th, 2025. I stopped breathing. I clicked on the document image. It was a PDF. It downloaded slowly on the spotty cell connection. The document filled my screen. It was a quitclaim deed. It stated that I, Sarah E. Reed, for the consideration of $10, conveyed all my interest in the property to Reed Family Holdings, LLC. I scrolled to the bottom of the page. There, on the signature line, was my name. Sarah E. Reed. It was written in black ink. It looped and curved. It looked like my signature. It looked exactly like my signature, but I had never seen this document in my life. I sat in my car, the engine cold, the ocean roaring somewhere in the distance, and stared at the forgery that had erased my inheritance. My parents had not just ignored Henry's wishes, they had stolen his gift, and they had used my own name to do it. The burnout did not happen all at once. It was a slow erosion, like water wearing down a stone. Until one day I looked in the mirror and did not recognize the woman staring back. It had been nearly a year since Henry died. 11 months of 60-hour work weeks, of eating takeout over my sink, of listening to my mother leave voicemails about charity galas I had no energy to attend. I felt hollowed out. My grief for my grandfather had not resolved. It had just been paved over by the relentless forward motion of a life I was not sure I even wanted anymore. I needed out, even if just for a few days. I sat at my desk on a Thursday afternoon, staring at a spreadsheet that seemed to be vibrating, and made the decision I would go to Seabrook Shores. I would take the deed out of the lockbox, drive down to the coast, and finally claim the sanctuary Henry had left me. I imagined myself sitting on the balcony with a book, the salt air untying the knots in my chest. I imagined sleeping for 12 hours straight with only the sound of the ocean as a soundtrack. I packed that night. I put the deed, still in its original manila folder, into the front pocket of my suitcase. I did not tell my parents. I did not tell Eric. This was mine. The drive down on Friday morning felt like an escape. As the city skyline faded in my rearview mirror, I felt the first deep breath I had taken in months rattle in my chest. By the time I crossed the causeway into Seabrook, I was almost giddy. The town looked exactly as I remembered it. The salt-bleached siding of the bait shops, the tourists eating ice cream on the corner, the eternal cry of the seagulls. I pulled into the parking lot of Ocean Crest Towers. The building was a mid-rise, modest and sturdy, standing firm against the Atlantic. I parked in the spot marked 4B. Seeing that number painted on the asphalt made my throat tight. It was a physical confirmation of my history here, of the summers spent hauling beach chairs and coolers from this very spot. I grabbed my suitcase and walked to the lobby. The air smelled of chlorine and old carpet, a scent that was inextricably linked to my childhood. I rode the elevator to the 4th floor, humming a little tune under my breath. When I reached the door of Unit 4B, I paused. I wanted to savor the moment. This was the first time I was entering as the owner. I reached into my purse and fished out the key Henry had given me years ago. It had a little plastic cap on it that had yellowed with age. I slid the key into the lock and turned. It hit a wall. I frowned, pulling it out and checking the teeth. It was definitely the right key. I tried again, wiggling it, applying a little more pressure. It would not budge. The cylinder felt different, tighter. My heart did a strange little flutter. Maybe the building management had updated the locks, but they would have notified the owners. I knocked on the door, thinking maybe the maintenance super was inside doing a routine check. Seconds passed. I raised my hand to knock again when the lock clicked from the inside. The deadbolt slid back with a heavy thud. The door swung open. Standing there was a woman I had never seen before. She was about my age, wearing a loose linen blouse and holding a cleaning rag. Behind her, the condo looked wrong. The heavy oak coat rack was gone. The walls, which had been a warm cream color for 20 years, were painted a stark, trendy gray. "Can I help you?" the woman asked. She had a pleasant, open face, but her eyes were guarded as she looked at my suitcase. I blinked, my brain stuttering. I am sorry. I must be confused. Is this Unit 4B? Yes, she said. I looked at the number on the door again. It was 4B. I am Sarah Reed, I said, my voice sounding thin in the hallway. Henry Reed's granddaughter. This is his apartment. My key is not working. The woman's expression shifted. She did not look malicious. She looked awkward. She turned her head slightly and called out behind her. Jason, can you come here a second? A man appeared from the kitchen. He was wiping his hands on a towel. He saw me, saw the suitcase, and his posture stiffened. What is going on? He asked. She says she is Henry Reed's granddaughter, the woman said. She tried to use a key. The man, Jason, sighed. It was the sigh of someone who had dealt with a difficult contractor, not a squatter. He stepped forward, placing a hand gently on the doorframe. Hi, he said. Look, I am sorry for your loss. We heard the previous owner passed away a while ago. But we bought this place. The floor seemed to drop away from beneath my feet. I gripped the handle of my suitcase so hard, my fingernails dug into my palm. You bought it? I repeated. That is not possible. We closed 6 months ago, Jason said. He spoke slowly, as if explaining something to a child. October 14th. We have been renovating for the last 2 months. No, I said, shaking my head. The movement made me dizzy. No, my grandfather gave this place to me. I have the deed. It is right here. I reached for the zipper of my suitcase, my hands trembling violently. I needed to show them. I needed to prove that reality was not what they said it was. Miss, please, Jason said, holding up a hand. You do not need to show us anything. We went through a title company. We have title insurance. We bought the unit from an investment group. Everything is legal. Investment group? I whispered. Seabrook Coastal something, the woman supplied. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and impatience. They were standing in my grandfather's home, surrounded by my memories that had been painted over in gray, telling me I did not exist here anymore. I felt tears pricking my eyes, hot and humiliating. There must be a mistake, I said, my voice cracking. My parents. They would have told me. Jason looked at his wife, then back at me. Look, you should probably call your family, or the building manager. But we are eating lunch, and we really cannot help you. He started to close the door. Wait, I said, instinctively stepping forward. I am sorry, Jason said firmly. The door closed. The sound of the latch clicking into place echoed in the silent hallway like a gunshot. I stood there for a long time. I stared at the wood grain of the door. I could hear the muffled sound of their voices inside, the clink of silverware. Life was happening in there, just not my life. I turned and walked back to the elevator. My legs felt like they were made of lead. I rode down to the lobby and walked out into the bright, blinding sunshine of the parking lot. I sat on the curb next to my car, putting my head between my knees to keep from fainting. I needed to think. I needed to verify. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for the building manager. It was saved in my phone as Mr. Henderson, Oceancrest. He answered on the second ring. Oceancrest Towers. This is Henderson. Mr. Henderson, it is Sarah Reed, Henry Reed's granddaughter. Oh, Sarah, he said, his voice dropping an octave. I was so sorry to hear about Henry. He was a good man. We miss him around here. I am actually downstairs. Mr. Henderson, I tried to get into Unit 4B, but the key does not work. There are people in there. There was a pause on the line, a long, uncomfortable silence. Sarah, nobody told you? Told me what? The unit was sold, he said gently, back in October. The new owners are the Marshes. Nice couple. But who sold it? I asked. Who signed the papers? Well, the transfer came through from a corporate entity, he said. Seabrook Coastal Investments, I believe. They held the title for just a few weeks before flipping it to the Marshes. Before that. Let me look at my file. I heard the sound of a file cabinet opening, papers shuffling. Here it is, he said. Before Seabrook Coastal. The title was transferred from Henry to you, and then from you to a Reed Family Holdings LLC. And then the LLC sold it to the investment group. The world stopped. From me? I asked. Yes, he said. The paperwork showed a quitclaim from Sarah Reed to Reed Family Holdings. I assumed it was just some family restructuring. Your father called the office to let us know the maintenance fees would be coming from the new account. I thanked him and hung up. I sat on the curb, the asphalt burning through my jeans, and stared at a seagull pecking at a discarded wrapper. Reed Family Holdings, LLC. That was my parents' primary shell company. They used it for everything. Vacation homes, cars, tax shelters, and Mr. Henderson had said the title transferred from me to them. I got into my car. I could not stay here. I could not be near the building. I drove 2 miles down the road to a coffee shop with Wi-Fi. Bought a black coffee I did not drink. And opened my laptop. I went to the county clerk's website. My fingers flew across the keys, fueled by a cold. Sharp adrenaline. Search records. parcel number 044-21-B. The history populated the screen. I saw the first entry. Grantor, Henry J. Reed. Grantee, Sarah E. Reed. Date recorded, January 25, 2025. That was the deed Henry had signed. The one in my suitcase. But wait, it had been recorded? Henry must have had his attorney record it immediately after signing it. Or perhaps the attorney did it right after he died? No. The date was 3 days after our meeting in the kitchen. Henry had recorded it himself before he had the stroke. He had made sure I owned it. Then I looked at the next line. Grantor. Sarah E. Reed. Grantee. Reed Family Holdings. LLC. Date recorded. August 15th, 2025. I clicked the document icon. The PDF opened. It was a standard quitclaim deed. It stated that I, Sarah Reed, residing at my address in Fairmont Heights, conveyed all rights to the property to Reed Family Holdings, LLC. I scrolled to the bottom. There was a signature. Sarah E. Reed. I zoomed in. The screen was grainy, but I could see the ink strokes. It looked like my handwriting. It had the same slant, the same loop on the R. If I were a bank teller, I would have accepted it without blinking. But I knew, with absolute, terrifying certainty, that I had never seen this piece of paper before. On August 15th, I had been in Chicago for a marketing conference. I remembered it clearly because I had gotten food poisoning from room service. I looked at the notary stamp. Carla Jennings. Commission expires 2028. I did not know a Carla Jennings. I scrolled up to the next entry. Grantor. Reed Family Holdings, LLC. Grantee. Seabrook Coastal Investments, LLC. Date recorded, September 2nd, 2025. Sale price, $450,000. And the final entry. Grantor. Seabrook Coastal Investments, LLC. Grantee. Amanda and Jason Marsh. Date recorded, October 14th, 2025. Sale price, $650,000. The math was brutal and simple. My parents, through their LLC, had acquired the condo from me for $0. They had sold it 2 weeks later to an investment group for $450,000. The investment group had flipped it a month later for a $200,000 profit. My parents had cashed out my inheritance. They had stolen nearly $500,000 from me, and to do it, they had forged my name. I closed the laptop. I felt a strange calm settling over me. It was the calm of someone who has survived a car crash and is checking their limbs for brakes. I was broken, but I was still moving. I drove back to Fairmont Heights. The 2-hour drive passed in a blur of white lines and red rage. I did not go to my apartment. I drove straight to the gated community where my parents lived. The guard at the gate waved me through. He knew my car. He smiled. He had no idea I was on my way to accuse the pillars of the community of a felony. I pulled into the circular driveway of the estate. The house was massive, a sprawling colonial revival with white pillars and perfectly manicured hedges. It looked like a postcard for the American dream. I grabbed the folder with Henry's deed and the printouts I had made at the coffee shop. I marched to the front door and let myself in. I still had a key. "Mom? Dad?" I called out. My voice was steady, louder than usual. "Sarah?" My mother's voice came from the sunroom. "We are in here. Darling, what a surprise." I walked into the sunroom. It was a beautiful space, filled with light and expensive orchids. My mother was arranging flowers in a crystal vase. My father was sitting in his leather armchair, reading a tablet. They looked up as I entered. My mother smiled, but it faltered when she saw my face. "Sarah? You look terrible. Is everything all right?" I walked over to the coffee table and slammed the stack of papers down on top of a glossy architectural magazine. "You sold the condo," I said. My father slowly lowered his tablet. He took off his reading glasses and folded them, placing them on the side table. He did not look surprised. He looked disappointed, like I had failed a test. "Sarah, please," he said, "lower your voice. The housekeeper's in the kitchen. I do not care about the housekeeper, I shouted. You sold Grandpa's condo. It was mine. He gave it to me. I pointed to the papers. I went to Seabrook today. I met the people living there. I pulled the title records. How could you? My mother sighed and wiped her hands on her apron. She walked over to me and tried to touch my arm. I flinched away. Sarah, honey, you are hysterical, she said soothingly. Sit down. Let us get you some tea. I am not hysterical, I said. I am the victim of fraud. Look at this. I stabbed my finger at the printout of the quitclaim deed. This says I signed the property over to your LLC in August. I was in Chicago in August. I never signed this. You forged my signature. My father stood up. He was a tall man, imposing. He used his height to dominate a room, and he did it now. That is a very serious accusation. Sarah, he said, his voice dropping to a low rumble, I suggest you be very careful about the words you use. I am using the word forgery because that is what it is, I said, staring him down. I never signed that deed. My father sighed and shook his head. He looked at my mother, sharing a look of weary exasperation. Sarah, think back, he said reasonably. The months after your grandfather died were chaotic. You were grieving. We were all grieving. There was a mountain of paperwork, tax documents, restructuring for the trust, insurance forms. We sat at this very table and signed stacks of papers. I did not sign a deed transferring my property to you. I said, I would have remembered that. Would you? He challenged gently. You were barely sleeping. You were taking those sleeping pills the doctor gave you. You were overwhelmed. We explained that we were consolidating the family assets to protect them from probate. You agreed. You signed. I stared at him. He was lying. I knew he was lying, but the way he said it, so calm, so authoritative, made a tiny crack of doubt open up in my mind. Had I signed a stack of papers? I remembered signing things, tax returns, beneficiary updates. No. I said, fighting the gaslighting. No. I specifically kept the deed Henry gave me in a lockbox. I never told you about it. We knew about the deed. Sarah, my mother said softly, Henry told us he was thinking about it before he died. He was confused near the end. We knew he wanted you to feel secure. That is why we handled it the way we did. Handled it? I asked. You sold it and kept the money. We did not keep the money, my father said, offended. We invested it. We used the proceeds to help Eric close his funding round. It was crucial timing. If he had missed that window, the startup would have failed. And we put the rest into the main family trust. So you took my inheritance and gave it to Eric? I asked, my voice trembling. We used a family asset to support the family business. My father corrected, it benefits all of us. When the trust matures, you will see the returns. Eric is building something that will take care of this family for generations. You should be proud to have contributed to that. Proud? I laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. Grandpa wanted me to have that condo so I could have something of my own, something separate from you. He told me that explicitly. He was senile. Sarah, my mother said sharply. He did not understand how complex our finances are. Having a separate property in your name would have created a tax nightmare. We simplified it. We did what was best for the estate, and we did what was best for you. You cannot afford the upkeep on a beachfront condo. The HOA fees alone are $1,200 a month. I have a job, I said. I could have rented it out. And dealt with tenants? My father scoffed. Please, you can barely handle your own schedule. We took a burden off your plate. I looked from one to the other. They truly believed it. They had rewritten reality to suit their narrative. In their minds, they were the responsible patriarch and matriarch. Fixing the mistakes of a senile old man and a naive daughter, the theft was just administrative cleanup. You forged my signature. I said again, quietly, I know I did not sign that. My father walked over to me. He put his hands on my shoulders. I stood rigid. Sarah, listen to me. You are upset. You are tired. You are looking for a villain because you miss your grandfather. But if you go down this road, if you start throwing around words like fraud, you are going to hurt yourself. And you are going to hurt Eric. Do you want to ruin your brother's career over a misunderstanding? It is not a misunderstanding, I whispered. It is memory. My father said, Memory is tricky. You signed the papers. Sarah, we have the notary seal to prove it. Do not embarrass yourself by claiming otherwise. He squeezed my shoulders. Now, why do you not stay for dinner? Cook made that roast chicken you like. We can put this behind us. I pulled away from him. I felt sick. Physically sick. The room was spinning. I looked at the papers on the table. My signature stared back at me. It looked so real. Was it possible? Was it remotely possible that in a haze of grief and Xanax, I had signed a paper I did not read? No. Henry's voice in my head was clear. Hide it. Sarah. I grabbed the papers. I am leaving. I said, Sarah, do not be dramatic. My mother called after me. I walked out of the house. I got into my car and locked the doors. I sat there for a moment, shaking uncontrollably. I looked at the printout again, the signature, the notary stamp, Carla Jennings. If I was wrong, if I had signed it and forgotten, then I was losing my mind. I was broken. But if I was right? I put the car in gear and drove away. I did not know where I was going, but I knew I could not go back to being the Sarah they wanted me to be. That Sarah had died the moment I saw a stranger standing in my grandfather's doorway. I was not sure if I was crazy or if I was a victim, but as I drove through the dark streets of Fairmont Heights, I realized that for the first time in my life, I was not going to just nod and agree. I was going to find out the truth, even if it burned everything down. I wiped the tears from my face, gripping the steering wheel. I needed proof, and I knew exactly where I had to start. I needed to find Carla Jennings. I spent the next 3 nights awake, sitting on my living room floor surrounded by a chaotic spread of bank statements, calendar printouts, and old emails. My apartment, usually kept with a minimalist precision, looked like the inside of a conspiracy theorist's mind. I was looking for the cracks in my own memory. My father's voice, smooth and authoritative, kept playing on a loop in my head. Memory is tricky. Sarah, you signed the papers. He had said it with such absolute conviction that I had to check. I had to know for sure that I had not simply lost a piece of my life to grief. I opened my laptop and logged into my email archive. I filtered the search for August of last year, August 1st through August 31st. I scrolled through hundreds of emails, work notifications, spam, newsletter subscriptions. I never read a recipe for lemon bars from my aunt. I found an email thread from my mother dated August 10th. The subject line was simply, Documents. I clicked it open. Sarah, darling. The email read, We are sending a FedEx package to your apartment with some final paperwork for the estate closing. Mostly tax things and the trust restructuring we discussed. Please sign where flagged and return in the prepaid envelope. We need to get this filed before the end of the month. I stared at the screen. I remembered this email. I remembered seeing it on my phone while I was waiting for a flight at O'Hare. I scrolled down to see my reply. Sent August 10th, 4 hours later. Hi, Mom. Sure thing. I am in Chicago until the 16th for the conference, but I will look for it when I get back. I checked the next email in the chain. Sent August 12th by Linda Reed. No worries. We will have the courier hold it. Just let us know when you are back. I sat back against the sofa, closing my eyes. I remembered coming back from Chicago. I was sick with food poisoning. I had spent 2 days in bed. I remembered checking my mail pile a week later. There had been bills, a wedding invitation, a catalog. There had never been a FedEx package. I searched my text messages next. I scrolled back, my thumb aching from the repetitive motion. August 20th, a text from Mom. Did you get the package? My reply, No, nothing here yet. Did you send it? Her reply, Oh, never mind. Dad says he handled it with the electronic signatures you authorized last year. We are all set. Rest up. I froze. Electronic signatures you authorized last year. I had never authorized electronic signatures for real estate transactions. I had authorized them for a specific healthcare proxy when Henry was in the hospital, and maybe for a shared cell phone plan years ago. But my parents took that inch of permission and stretched it into a mile of fraud. But the quitclaim deed I had seen online did not have an electronic signature. It had a wet signature. It looked like pen on paper. I looked at the date on the deed again. August 15th. On August 15th. I was in a hotel room in Chicago. Throwing up. I was not signing a deed in front of a notary named Carla Jennings in Fairmont Heights. The timeline was the smoking gun. They had tried to get me to sign it legitimately via FedEx. When I was away and delayed, they got impatient or greedy and decided to forge it, covering their tracks with a text about electronic signatures to stop me from asking questions. I needed to see the original. I took a sick day on Monday. I told my boss I had a migraine, which was not entirely a lie. The pressure behind my eyes was throbbing like a second heartbeat. I drove down to Seabrook Shores. The drive was usually therapeutic, but today the coastal highway felt like a tunnel closing in on me. I arrived at the county recorder's office at 10 o'clock in the morning. It was a drab, beige building that smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. I walked up to the counter. The clerk was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose and a name tag that read, Patricia. "Can I help you?" she asked, not looking up from her sorting. "Yes," I said. "I need to see the original document for a recorded deed. The parcel number is 04421B. She sighed, typed the number into her computer, and frowned. "That is a recent recording," she said. "It should be in the current bindery. One moment." She disappeared into the back rows of metal shelves. I stood there, listening to the hum of the fluorescent lights. My palms were sweating. She returned with a thick book bound in blue canvas. She thumped it onto the counter and flipped through the pages. "Here we are," she said. "Quitclaim, read to read, family holdings." I looked at the page. It was the physical document. I could see the indentation of the pen on the paper. I looked at the signature. Sarah E. Reed. It was a good forgery, a very good one, but now that I was looking at the original, staring at the ink with my face 6 inches from the page, I saw the flaw, the capital S. When I write a capital S, I loop the bottom tail inward, almost closing the circle. It was a habit I picked up in grade school calligraphy class and never dropped. The S on this document had a sharp, straight tail that flicked outward. It was my father's S. I felt a wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to grip the counter for support. My father had signed my name. He had sat at his desk, probably sipping his morning espresso, and carefully written my name on a legal document to steal my property. I looked at the address typed under my name. Sarah E. Reed, 4500 Highland Avenue, Fairmont Heights. That was my parents' address. I had not lived there in 10 years. I looked at the notary section. State of State, County of Seabrook. On this 15th day of August, 2025, before me, Carla Jennings, personally appeared Sarah E. Reed, proved to me on the basis of satisfactory evidence to be the person whose name is subscribed to the within instrument. I looked up at Patricia. "Excuse me," I said, my voice shaking. "Can you tell me anything about this notary? Carla Jennings?" Patricia glanced at the stamp. "Oh, sure. Carla is a mobile notary. She drives around to people's houses, hospitals, that sort of thing. She is in here a lot recording things for the senior centers. Does she verify identity?" I asked. "She is required to by law," Patricia said, looking at me curiously. "She has to see a government ID and watch the person sign the book. Why? Is there a problem?" I looked down at the document that claimed I had personally appeared before a woman I had never met, on a day I was 300 miles away. "Yes," I said quietly, "there is a problem. But thank you." I walked out of the recorder's office and sat in my car in the parking lot. I felt violated. It was a physical sensation, like I had been mugged. My parents had not just taken the condo, they had stolen my agency. They had used my name as a tool, a prop in their business dealings. Assuming I would never notice or never dare to challenge them, I needed to talk to someone. I could not carry this alone anymore. I drove back to the city and went straight to the office. Even though I had called in sick, I needed to see Mia. Mia Lawson was the art director at our firm. She was sharp, cynical, and the only person at work who knew the full extent of my family dynamic. She found me hiding in the empty conference room on the 4th floor. "Sarah?" she said, closing the door behind her. "You are supposed to be out with a migraine. You look like you have seen a ghost." "I think I have." I said. I told her everything. I told her about the condo, the secret deed, the visit to Seabrook, the marshes, and the signature with the wrong S. Mia listened without interrupting, her eyes getting wider and wider. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and let out a long, low whistle. "Okay," she said. "Let me get this straight. Your parents, the pillars of Fairmont society, forged your signature to steal a beachfront property, sold it for $500,000, and are now gaslighting you into thinking you forgot signing it?" "Yes," I said. "That is not just bad parenting." "Sarah," she said firmly, "that is a felony. That is fraud." "I know," I said, putting my head in my hands. "But they are my parents. They said they did it for the family. They said they invested the money in Eric's startup." Mia slammed her hand on the table, making me jump. "Stop," she said. "Do not do that. Do not rationalize it for them. Being rich does not mean your parents are allowed to commit fraud. If a stranger did this to you, you would be calling the police right now. Just because they share your DNA does not give them the right to rob you." "But Eric," I started. "Eric is an adult," Mia said. "If his startup needed stolen money to survive, it was not a viable business. Sarah, they used you. They committed a crime in your name. You have to fight this. I am scared." "Mia," I whispered, "they have lawyers. They have money. I have nothing. I have a job that pays me $60,000 a year." Mia reached across the table and took my hand. "You have the truth," she said, "and you have proof. You need a lawyer, not one of their corporate sharks. You need someone local to Seabrook who knows the game." She was right. I knew she was right. I spent the next hour on my phone, searching for real estate attorneys in Seabrook Shores. I ignored the big firms with flashy websites. I looked for someone small, someone who looked like they actually went to court. I found a website for David Harlan, attorney at law. The site was outdated. Copyright 2018. His bio said he specialized in property disputes and elder law. There was a photo of him standing on a fishing boat. I called his office. A receptionist answered and said he had an opening at 4 o'clock that afternoon, if I could make it down there. I got back in my car and drove to Seabrook for the second time that day. David Harlan's office was located in a converted bungalow 3 blocks from the beach. The sign out front was peeling slightly. Inside, the waiting room was cluttered with fishing magazines and legal journals. David Harlan himself came out to greet me. He was a man in his 60s with wind-blown gray hair and a face that looked like it had spent a lot of time squinting at the sun. He was wearing a rumpled suit and a tie with sailboat motifs. "Ms. Reed?" he said, extending a hand. "Come on back." His office was a disaster of piled files and loose papers, but his desk was clear. I sat down and laid out my story. I showed him the printouts. I explained the timeline. I told him about the FedEx email and the text message. David listened intently, leaning back in his chair, tapping a yellow pencil against his chin. He did not interrupt. He let me spill the whole messy, painful saga. When I finished, he sat forward and placed the pencil on the desk. "You have a mess on your hands." "Sarah," he said. His voice was gravelly but kind. "I know." I said. "Let us look at the facts," he said, ticking them off on his fingers. Fact 1. Your grandfather executed a valid deed to you. Fact 2. That deed was recorded. Fact 3. A subsequent quitclaim deed appeared, transferring title to your parents' LLC. Fact 4. You claim that signature is forged. It is forged. I said, "I believe you." He said, "The timeline with the FedEx email is compelling. The notary issue is significant. If you were in Chicago, you could not have appeared before Carla Jennings in Fairmont Heights. That is fraud. Plain and simple. And since your grandfather was involved in the initial transfer, and this involves his estate, We are also looking at potential elder financial abuse. He paused, looking at me over his reading glasses. But I need to be honest with you. Fighting this is going to be brutal. You are not just suing a faceless corporation. You are suing your parents. They have resources. They will drag this out. They will try to discredit you. They will say you are unstable, confused, or ungrateful. They already have. I said, "My father told me my memory is tricky." David nodded grimly. That is the playbook. And there is another complication. The Marshes, the couple who bought the condo? Right. They are what the law calls bona fide purchasers for value. They bought the property in good faith, unaware of the fraud. Courts hate taking homes away from innocent buyers. If we win, the court might not give you the condo back. They might just award you monetary damages equal to the value of the property. I felt a pang of loss. I did not want the money. I wanted the sanctuary. But, David continued, if we can prove the deed was void ab initio, meaning it was a forgery from the start, then legally, the title never passed. The Marshes would lose the condo, and they would have to sue your parents and the title insurance company to get their money back. It gets very messy, very fast. He picked up the printout of the sale history. There is one thing I find interesting, though. He said, "What? Look at the dates. Your parents sold the condo to the investment group on September 2nd for $450,000. The investment group sold it to the Marshes on October 14th for $650,000. Yeah, I said. They flipped it. That is a $200,000 jump in 6 weeks. David said. That is not normal market appreciation. Even for a flip, what does it mean? He stood up and walked to a large map of Seabrook shores pinned to his wall. He tapped a spot on the coastline. Just north of Ocean Crest Towers, last month, the town council approved the new boardwalk revitalization project right here, he said. It is a $50 million development. Upscale shops, a pier, a park. It is going to drive property values in that sector through the roof. He turned back to me. The rumors about this project have been circulating in town council meetings for 6 months, but the official announcement was only made in late September. I stared at him, connecting the dots. My parents sold it on September 2nd. I said, before the announcement. David nodded. Or, they sold it to an investment group that knew about the announcement. Look at the buyer. Seabrook Coastal Investments, LLC. I would bet my fishing boat that if we dig into that LLC, we might find some interesting connections to local developers or council members. He sat back down. Here is my theory. Sarah, your parents wanted quick cash, maybe for your brother, maybe for something else. They knew the condo was an asset they could liquidate. They forged the deed to get title. They sold it fast to a developer who gave them a quick, quiet cash deal because he knew the value was about to spike. Your parents left $200,000 on the table because they were in a rush to wash their hands of the asset before anyone noticed. It made sense. It made sickening, perfect sense. It was not just theft. It was a sloppy, desperate fire sale. So, what do I do? I asked. David looked me in the eye. You need evidence, hard evidence. I need you to find anything that proves Henry's intent. Did he write anything down? A letter? A diary entry? Anything that explicitly says he wanted you to have this property separate from the trust. And I need samples of your real signature from around that time. Checks, credit card receipts. I have a letter. I said suddenly. David's eyebrows shot up. You do? My grandfather told me he left a letter with his attorney. Not the family lawyer. Martin Cole, his old attorney. Alan Morris. Alan Morris? David smiled. I know Alan. He is a good man. If Alan has a letter, that changes things. That is your silver bullet. Go see Alan, David said. Get that letter. Then come back to me, and we will talk about a retainer. But Sarah, be sure, once we file this, there is no going back. You will be at war with your family. I stood up. I felt steadier than I had in days. I am already at war. David, I said, I just did not know it until now. I drove back to Fairmont Heights as the sun was setting. The sky was a bruised purple, matching the feeling in my chest. I did not go home. I went to the address I found for Alan Morris. His office was in an older part of the city, in a brownstone that had seen better days. It was 7 o'clock at night, but the lights were still on. I rang the buzzer. A buzz sounded, and I pushed the door open. Alan Morris was waiting for me in the hallway. He was ancient, easily in his 80s, leaning on a cane. He wore a cardigan and slippers. "Sarah Reed?" he asked, his voice raspy. "Yes, Mr. Morris. I have been wondering when you would come," he said. "Come in." His office smelled of pipe tobacco and dust. It was lined with books that looked like they hadn't been moved in decades. He sat down heavily behind his desk and opened a drawer. He pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with red wax. "Your grandfather came to see me a week before he died," Alan said. "He was worried. He told me he had signed a deed to you. He was afraid Charles would try to undo it." He pushed the envelope across the desk. "He told me to give this to you if there was ever any trouble." "I assume there is trouble?" "There is," I said, reaching for the envelope. My hand trembled as I touched it. I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of yellow legal pad paper. The handwriting was shaky, the letters spider-webbed with age, but legible. I read it. "My dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, it means the sharks have started circling. I am sorry. I want to be very clear, so that no lawyer can twist my words. The condo in Seabrook, Unit 4B, is yours. I have deeded it to you because I want you to have a place that is safe, a place that is not leverage. Your father and mother see money as a scorecard. I see it as a tool. I fear that after I'm gone, they will try to fold everything I built into their own game. Do not let them take this from you. It is not part of the trust. It is not part of the business. It is a gift from a grandfather to the granddaughter who was the only one to ever ask me how my day was. Rather than how the market was doing, keep it, live in it, sell it, and travel the world. Whatever you do it for yourself. I love you. Kid. Grandpa." I let out a sob that sounded like something tearing. I pressed the letter to my chest, squeezing my eyes shut. I could hear his voice in the words. I could feel the fierce, protective love he had for me. He knew. He had known exactly what they would do. He had seen the greed in his own son's eyes and had tried to build a wall around me to protect me. "Thank you," I whispered to Alan. Alan nodded slowly. "Henry was a smart man, and he loved you very much. You take that letter, Sarah, and you go get what is yours." I drove home with the letter on the passenger seat next to me. It felt like a shield. When I got into my apartment, my phone was ringing. It was my father. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, I answered. "Hello?" "Sarah," Charles said. His voice was cold, devoid of the warmth he had feigned earlier. "I just got off the phone with the bank. They flagged a credit inquiry from a lawyer in Seabrook. David Harlan." I said nothing. "What are you doing?" "Sarah?" he asked. "I am getting advice." "Dad." I said. "Listen to me," he said, his voice dropping to a low, threatening register. "If you file anything, if you file a single piece of paper that clouds the title on that condo, you are going to regret it." "Is that a threat?" "It is a reality check. We have investors looking at Eric's company right now. If there is a whiff of fraud or family legal trouble, they will pull out. You will destroy your brother's future. Do you understand? If you do this, I will cut you off. I will pull the financial help for your car insurance. I will write you out of the will completely." I gripped the phone. "You already stole my inheritance. Dad, what is left to write me out of?" There was a silence on the line. A stunned, heavy silence. "You are making a mistake," he said finally. "No." I said, "You made the mistake when you signed my name." I hung up. I dropped the phone on the couch and stood there, trembling. My heart was racing so fast it felt like it was fluttering in my throat. My vision started to tunnel. I fell to my knees on the rug. I could not breathe. My chest felt like it was in a vice. Panic attack. I gasped for air, but my lungs refused to fill. The room was spinning. I felt like I was dying, The weight of it all, the betrayal, the loss of my parents, the fear of the battle ahead, crushed me. I crawled across the floor to where I had dropped Henry's letter. I grabbed it. I crumpled the yellow paper in my fist. It is a gift from a grandfather to the granddaughter who was the only one to ever ask me how my day was. I focused on the handwriting, the shaky loops of the letters. I focused on Henry. I took a breath, a small one, then another. I am not alone. I thought, he is with me. Slowly. The vice on my chest loosened. The black spots in my vision faded. I sat on the floor, clutching the letter, rocking back and forth until my heart rate slowed to a gallop, then a trot. I looked around my empty apartment. It was quiet. I had lost my parents today. I knew that. There was no going back to the Sunday dinners or the polite fiction of a happy family. They had drawn a line in the sand, and they had put money on one side and me on the other. But I had the letter, and I had the truth. I stood up. My legs were shaky, but they held me. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I drank it in one long gulp. Tomorrow, I would call David Harlan. Tomorrow, I would give him the retainer. Tomorrow, I would start the war. But tonight, I would read my grandfather's letter one more time, and I would sleep knowing that for the first time in my life, I was doing exactly what I wanted to do. Not what I was told. I was Sarah Reed, and I was done being the good daughter. The pen felt heavy in my hand, not because of its weight, but because of what the signature represented. I was sitting in David Harlan's cluttered office, the smell of stale coffee and old paper filling the small room. On the desk between us lay a retainer agreement. I had spent the last 24 hours doing math in my head. I had $6,000 in savings. My checking account had enough to cover next month's rent and my car payment, with a margin of error that was terrifyingly slim. David had agreed to a modified fee structure, a lower upfront retainer of $3,000, with the rest contingent on a settlement or judgment, plus hourly billing for court appearances if we went that far. It was a good deal. For a lawyer, it was a charitable deal. But for me, writing a check for $3,000 felt like cutting off a limb. It was half my safety net. I looked at David. He was watching me, his expression patient. He was not pushing. He knew what this cost, and I suspected he knew it was not just about the money. It was about crossing a Rubicon. Once I signed this, I was no longer just a daughter asking questions. I was a plaintiff. I am ready, I said, though my voice wavered slightly. I signed the check. I signed the agreement. I pushed them across the desk. David took them and slid them into a folder. He did not smile. He nodded, a serious, respectful dip of his chin. Okay, Sarah, he said, here is how we start. We are going to file a civil complaint for fraud, conversion, and financial abuse of an elder. But the first thing I'm going to do, within the hour, is file a lis pendens with the county recorder. Lis pendens? I asked. I remembered the term vaguely from my frantic Googling, but I wanted to hear him say it. It is Latin for suit pending, David explained, leaning back in his chair. It is a public notice filed against the property title. It tells the world, banks, buyers, title companies, that there is an active lawsuit regarding the ownership of that condo. What does it do? It effectively freezes the asset. He said, the Marshes will not be able to sell it. They will not be able to refinance their mortgage. If they try to use the condo as collateral for a loan, the bank will see the lis pendens and run for the hills. It clouds the title. It turns the condo into a radioactive asset until this is resolved. I felt a pang of guilt. The Marshes, the couple I had met in the doorway, who were just eating lunch and watching football. They are innocent in this, aren't they? I asked. Legally, probably, David said. But tactically, they are necessary collateral damage. We need to stop the chain of title. And frankly, putting pressure on them puts pressure on the title insurance company, which puts pressure on your parents. It forces everyone to the table. He picked up a notepad. I am also sending demand letters today. To your parents, to the LLCs, to the Marshes. We are laying out the facts. The forged signature, the timeline, and Henry's letter. We are demanding the return of the property or damages equal to its current market value. He looked me in the eye. This is the warning shot. Sarah. But it is a loud one. Once that list pendens hits the record, people are going to know. Your parents' friends. Their business partners. Real estate news travels fast in a town like Seabrook. Are you ready for the phone to ring? I took a deep breath. I thought of the S on the signature line that looked like my father's. Let it ring, I said. The phone rang 2 days later. I was at work, sitting in a budget meeting for a client's Q3 strategy, when my cell phone buzzed against the table. I glanced at the screen. It was a number I did not recognize, but the area code was Seabrook. I stepped out of the meeting, ignoring my boss's irritated glance, and answered in the hallway. Hello? Is this Sarah Reed? A male voice asked. It sounded tired, strained. Yes, this is she. This is Jason Marsh, the voice said. We met, briefly, at the condo. My stomach dropped. The image of him blocking the door, protecting his home, flashed in my mind. Mr. Marsh, I said, I am so sorry. He let out a short, humorless laugh. You are sorry? Miss Reed, I just got a letter from your lawyer accusing us of buying stolen property. And 10 minutes ago, my mortgage broker called me. We were in the middle of refinancing to get a lower rate for the renovations. He told me the funding is pulled because there is a red flag on the title. A lis pendens. I leaned against the cool wall of the corridor. I know, I said quietly. Look, he said, and I could hear the frustration vibrating in his voice. We are not bad people. We bought that place fair and square. We paid $650,000. We have title insurance. We did everything right. We did not know about any family drama. We do not want to be part of a scam. I believe you. I said, I really do. I do not want to hurt you. But my parents stole that condo from me. They forged my signature to sell it to you. If I do not file that notice, they get away with it. There was a silence on the line. Your lawyer sent us a copy of the deed. Jason said, the one you say is forged, and a copy of a letter from your grandfather. He paused. My wife, Amanda. She read the letter. She cried. I felt a lump form in my throat. Mr. Marsh, I said, I am not trying to take your home just to be cruel, but that was my grandfather's home. He gave it to me. I just want the truth to come out. Jason sighed. A long, weary exhale. We are calling our lawyer, he said, and we are calling the title company. I just wanted you to know. If what you say is true, if your folks really did this, that is sick. That is really sick. He hung up. I stood there for a moment, looking at the disconnected screen. He was right. It was sick. But hearing a stranger validate it gave me a strange, hollow sort of strength. 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, the caller ID said, Dad. I stared at it. The phone vibrated in my hand like an angry hornet. I considered letting it go to voicemail. David had told me to direct all communication to him. Do not engage, he had said. Everything you say can be used against you. But I could not help it. I needed to hear him. I needed to hear the tone of his voice when he realized he could not control me anymore. I swiped answer. Hello, you ungrateful little brat. The voice was not a shout. It was a hiss. It was low and venomous, filled with a cold rage that I had only ever heard directed at incompetent employees or business rivals. Never at me. Hello to you too. Dad, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I just got a letter from some ambulance chaser in Seabrook. He said, and a notification from the county. You filed a lis pendens? On a property you do not own? I do own it. I said, Grandpa gave it to me. You stole it. We did not steal anything, he shouted now, the control slipping. We managed an asset. We saved it from being wasted. And now you are trying to destroy this family. Do you have any idea what you have done? I have hired a lawyer, I said. You have humiliated us, Charles roared. The HOA president at Oceancrest called me. He asked if there was a criminal investigation. A criminal investigation. Sarah, do you know who sits on that board? Bob Halloway. I play golf with him every Tuesday. He asked me if I was in trouble. I felt a savage flicker of satisfaction. Maybe you should have thought about that before you signed my name to a federal document. I said, I did not sign your name. He lied, so effortlessly that it was terrifying. You signed it. You are confused. Sarah, you are sick. We have been worried about your mental state for months, and this proves it. You are having a breakdown. I am not having a breakdown. I said, I found the notary. Dad. Carla Jennings. Does she ring a bell? There was a sudden, sharp silence on the other end. It lasted only a second, but it was there. I do not know who that is, he said, but his voice lacked the previous conviction. Listen to me. You are going to withdraw that filing. You are going to fire that lawyer, and you are going to come home and apologize. If you do not, I will make sure you have nothing. I will sue you for defamation. I will bankrupt you. You already took the condo. I said, what else is there to take? I hung up. I turned off my phone. I went back into the meeting, my hands shaking under the table, but my head held high. He was scared, for the first time in my life. Charles Reed was scared of me. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in social warfare. The Lis Pendens was a public record. In a small, wealthy enclave like Seabrook Shores, and by extension, the social circles of Fairmont Heights, public records were better read than the morning paper. David told me that the Marshes had filed a claim with their title insurance company. The title insurance company, facing a massive payout, had immediately launched an investigation. They were asking questions. They were subpoenaing the notary. The pressure was mounting. I heard from a cousin I rarely spoke to that my parents had stopped going to the country club on weekends. Apparently, the legal issue involving Henry's estate had become the preferred topic of conversation over gin and tonics. The implication of fraud, of financial impropriety, was a stain that money could not easily wash out. In their world, you could be divorced, you could be an alcoholic, but you could not be broke, and you certainly could not be a crook. My parents responded the only way they knew how, with overwhelming force. 3 weeks after the filing, I received a large envelope at my apartment. It was delivered by a courier. The return address was Klein, Darrow Associates, Marjorie Klein. She was the kind of lawyer who cost $1,000 an hour and had a reputation for shredding opponents into confetti. I opened the letter. Dear Ms. Reed, we represent Charles and Linda Reed regarding the frivolous and defamatory claims asserted in your recent correspondence and legal filings. Your allegations of forgery and fraud are categorically denied. The quitclaim deed dated August 15, 2025, was properly executed as part of a comprehensive estate planning strategy to which you gave implied consent through your ongoing participation in the family trust management. Your actions in filing a lis pendens have caused significant reputational harm to our clients and have tortiously interfered with the quiet enjoyment of the current owners. Mr. and Mrs. Marsh, we are preparing to file a countersuit for defamation of character, malicious prosecution, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, seeking damages in excess of $2 million. However, in the interest of preserving family privacy and avoiding further embarrassment to you, our clients are willing to engage in a private mediation to resolve this misunderstanding. I read it twice. Implied consent. Misunderstanding. They were rewriting history again, but the threat was real. $2 million. They were trying to scare me into submission. I called David. I got the letter from Klein. I said, me too. David said, he sounded unbothered. It is a standard scare tactic. Sarah, Marjorie Klein is a pit bull, but she is barking because she has no bite. They know the notary is a weak link. They do not want to go to court. They want to settle. They want mediation. I said, exactly, David said, and we are going to accept. We are? Yes, because that is where we get them on the record. We go in there, we see what they offer, and we show them that we are not going away. It is time to look them in the eye. The mediation was scheduled for a Tuesday in November. It was held at a neutral location, a mediation center in downtown Fairmont Heights. The offices were sleek, all glass and polished steel, designed to make you feel small and poor. I wore my best suit, a navy blue blazer I used for client presentations. I met David in the lobby. He had traded his fishing tie for a solid red one, but his suit still looked like he had slept in it. It made me like him even more. We walked into the conference room. My parents were already there. They sat on one side of a long, oval table made of frosted glass. My father wore a charcoal suit, his face set in a mask of grim determination. My mother wore a cream-colored dress and pearls, looking like the grieving victim. Next to them sat Marjorie Klein. She was a striking woman with razor-sharp cheekbones and hair cut into a precise, angular bob. She did not look up when we entered. At the head of the table sat the mediator, a retired judge named Mr. Sterling. He looked bored. We sat down. The silence in the room was thick enough to choke on. My mother looked at me, her eyes welling up with tears instantly. "Sarah," she whispered, "you look thin." I ignored her. I opened my notebook and placed my pen next to it. "Let us begin." "Mr." Sterling said. Marjorie Klein started. She spoke for 20 minutes without breathing. She painted a picture of a loving, generous family besieged by a confused and ungrateful daughter. She talked about the complexity of the estate. She used phrases like holistic asset management and fiduciary duty. She argued that while the physical signature might be contested, the intent of the family was always clear, and that I had impliedly authorized my parents to handle the paperwork. It was a masterclass in gaslighting by the time she finished. I almost felt guilty for being there. Then it was David's turn. He was brief. My client's grandfather gave her a property. He said, her parents forged her name and sold it. "That is not estate planning. That is theft. Mr." Sterling looked at the papers in front of him. "Okay," he said. "We are here to see if we can resolve this. Ms. Klein, do you have a proposal?" Marjorie Klein nodded. She slid a piece of paper across the table. "In the interest of family unity, and to avoid the public spectacle of a trial, my clients are willing to offer a settlement," she said. David picked up the paper. He looked at it, his face impassive. He slid it to me. I looked at the number. $75,000. This represents Sarah's share of what the grandfather intended, adjusted for the taxes the parents paid and the debts of the estate, Marjorie explained smoothly. "It is a gesture of goodwill, in exchange. Sarah will dismiss the lawsuit with prejudice, remove the lis pendens, and sign a non-disclosure agreement." I stared at the paper. $75,000. The condo had sold for $650,000. "This is a joke," I said. "It is a generous offer," my father said, his voice hard. "It is an insult." I said, "You sold it for nearly 10 times that amount. We have expenses," my mother burst out. She reached across the table, her hands fluttering. "Sarah, please, why are you doing this? Think of everything we have done for you. Here it comes." I thought, "The guilt. We paid for your college," she said, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "We bought you that car when you graduated. We helped you with the deposit on your apartment. We have always supported you. We have always been there for you. And now, because of one misunderstanding, because of one piece of paper, you want to ruin us? You are hurting your brother," my father added. "Eric is sick with worry. This is selfish. Sarah, you have always been the sensible one. Be sensible now. Take the money. End this." I looked at them. I saw the fear behind their eyes. They were terrified of the world finding out who they really were. They were trying to buy my silence with pennies, wrapping it in the language of love and sacrifice. I felt a cold clarity wash over me. I was not the sensible one. I was the convenient one. David cleared his throat. He reached into his briefcase. "We have a counteroffer," he said. He did not pull out a settlement figure. He pulled out a plastic sleeve containing a single sheet of yellow legal paper. He slid it into the center of the table. "This is a letter from Henry Reed." David said quietly. Written 3 days before he died. Delivered to his personal attorney. Alan Morris. My father stiffened. My mother stopped crying and stared at the yellow paper. David began to read, his voice calm and steady in the acoustically perfect room. I want to be very clear, so that no lawyer can twist my words. The condo in Seabrook is yours. I have deeded it to you because I want you to have a place that is safe, a place that is not leverage. He looked up at my parents. Your father and mother see money as a scorecard. I see it as a tool. I fear that after I'm gone, they will try to fold everything I built into their own game. The room was silent, absolutely silent. The hum of the air conditioning sounded like a jet engine. David read the final line. It is not part of the trust. It is not part of the business. It is a gift. He left the letter on the table. Henry Reed did not just deed the property to Sarah. David said, he explicitly excluded it from your control. He predicted exactly what you would do. My father's face was gray. He looked at the letter as if it were a bomb. Marjorie Klein reached for the letter, but my mother was faster. She snatched it off the table. She read it, her eyes darting back and forth. He was confused, she snapped, her voice shrill and ugly. This proves he was confused. She looked at me, her face twisted in a snarl I had never seen before. Dad didn't understand finances. Sarah. He thought he could just give things away. He didn't understand about tax brackets and liquidity. We had to fix things he did. We had to clean up his mess. The words hung in the air. We had to fix things he did. David leaned forward, his eyes sharp. So you admit it? He asked softly. You admit you altered the estate plan because you disagreed with his decisions? You admit you overrode his wishes? My mother froze. She realized what she had said. She looked at Marjorie Klein, who had closed her eyes and was pinching the bridge of her nose. My father slammed his hand on the table. This is entrapment, he shouted. We were acting as trustees. We have broad discretion. Not to forge a signature, David said. Not to sell property you do not own. Marjorie Klein put a hand on my father's arm to silence him. Mr. Harlan, she said, her voice tight. I think we need a recess. No, I said. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. I looked at my parents. I looked at the people who had raised me, who had taught me to tell the truth, who had punished me for lying. I do not want a recess. I said, and I do not want your $75,000. Sarah, sit down, my father commanded. It was the voice he used when I was 10 years old. I did not sit. You stole from me. I said, you stole the one thing Grandpa wanted me to have, and you did it because you think you are above the rules. You think because you paid for my college. You own me. You think because you are the Reeds. You can rewrite the law. I picked up my purse. I want a judge to hear you say that Grandpa didn't understand finances. I said to my mother, I want a jury to see that letter. I want the whole world to know what you did. We are done here. I turned and walked to the door. Sarah, my mother screamed, if you walk out that door, you are dead to us. Do you hear me? You are dead to this family. I paused with my hand on the handle. I looked back. They looked small. They looked mean and small and terrified. I was dead to this family the moment you signed my name. I said, I opened the door and walked out. I walked through the lobby, past the security guard, and out onto the sidewalk. The city air was cold and smelled of exhaust. I stood there for a moment, trembling. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I felt lightheaded. I felt terrified. I had just burned the bridge. I had just orphaned myself. But as I took a deep breath, I realized something else. The weight was gone. The crushing, invisible weight of trying to please them, of trying to fit into their box, of trying to earn love that was always conditional. It was gone. David came out a moment later. He looked at me and smiled. That was brave. He said, I don't feel brave. I said, I feel like I'm going to throw up. That is the adrenaline, he said. Go home. Sarah, get a drink, rest. The real fight starts now. I drove back to my apartment. I did not turn on the radio. I sat in the silence of my own life, a life that was finally, truly mine. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my balcony, watching the city lights. My phone buzzed on the table. I stared at it. If it was my father, I was going to throw it off the balcony. I picked it up. It was a text message. From an unknown number, no name, just a local area code. I opened it. There was a single line of text. Check Dad's emails around the boardwalk announcement. September 20th. Look for the thread with Councilman Miller. I stared at the screen. The boardwalk announcement. The timing. David's theory about the insider information. My thumb hovered over the screen. Someone else knew. Someone on the inside. I took a sip of wine, the liquid cool and sharp in my throat. I was done being the victim. I was done being the daughter. I was the plaintiff, and I had a new lead. The text message I received on the balcony changed everything. It was a digital breadcrumb, a crack in the fortress wall that my parents had built around their lies. Check Dad's emails around the boardwalk announcement. I forwarded the screenshot to David Harlan immediately. The next morning, David filed a supplemental discovery request. He did not ask for all emails. He asked for specific communications between Charles Reed, Reed Family Holdings, LLC, and any representatives of the Seabrook Town Council or Seabrook Coastal Investments during the month of September. He also subpoenaed my brother's phone records, acting on a hunch that the anonymous texter might be closer to home than we thought. The results came in waves, like debris washing up after a storm. First, there was the confirmation of the texter. The number traced back to a burner phone purchased at a convenience store in downtown Fairmont Heights. But the geolocation data on the text coincided perfectly with the GPS signal of Eric's smartwatch, which he had foolishly left synced to the family cloud account. Eric, my golden brother, the beneficiary of the theft, was also the leak. David used this leverage to pressure Eric's personal attorney. He made it clear that Eric could be named as a co-conspirator in the fraud suit unless he cooperated with the document production. Eric, terrified of his startup losing its reputation before it even launched, folded. He provided access to a shared server that Charles used for family business. I sat in David's office a week later, surrounded by bankers' boxes of printed emails. It was raining outside, a cold, gray drizzle that matched the feeling in my stomach. "Here is the motive," David said, sliding a stapled packet across the desk. I picked it up. It was an email chain dated September 2nd, 2 weeks before the public announcement of the Boardwalk Revitalization Project. The email was from a man named Councilman Miller. It was sent to my father's private email address, Charles. It read, "Just a heads up, the vote is locked for the 21st. $50 million in infrastructure. Values on the North Strip are going to double overnight. If you are going to move that unit, do it now, or hold it for 5 years. But if you sell to my guys at Coastal before the news breaks, we can structure a buyback option for your other holdings." My father's reply was sent 10 minutes later. "Understood. We are moving the asset to the holding company today. We'll close with Coastal by the end of the week. Need to lock in the upside before the old man changes his mind again or the estate gets complicated. Cash infusion is critical for Eric's Series A." I read it again. Before the old man changes his mind again. This was dated September 2nd. Henry had died in January. My father was writing about the old man changing his mind months after the funeral. "No," David said, seeing my confusion. "Look at the forwarded thread below it." I looked down. There was an older email attached to the chain, dated December of the previous year, 2 months before Henry died. "Linda," my father had written, "Your father is talking about deeding the condo to Sarah. He mentioned it to Alan Morris. If he does that, we lose the capital leverage. We need to get him to sign power of attorney now, or we need to prepare a transfer that predates whatever he gives her. It is wasted capital sitting there." I felt the blood drain from my face. They had been planning this while he was still alive. They knew he wanted to give it to me. They viewed his dying wish not as a legacy to be honored, but as a financial leak to be plugged. "There is more," David said gently. He handed me another sheet. This one was an email from my mother to my father. dated just a few weeks after the funeral. They were discussing the logistics of the forgery. Though they used careful, coded language, Linda wrote, "I am worried about Sarah asking questions. She keeps talking about going down to the shore. We need to get the title transfer recorded before she tries to use the unit. Eric needs the funds by October. Sarah will just sit in that condo and journal. It is a waste. Better to put it to use for the family future." I stared at the sentence. Sarah will just sit in that condo and journal. It was such a small, petty cruelty. It wasn't about the money. Really, it was about their absolute contempt for who I was. To them, my life, my thoughts, my writing, my need for solitude, was nothing but a waste of square footage. They didn't just steal the condo because they needed the cash. They stole it because they didn't think I deserved to own it. They thought my existence was less valuable than Eric's startup. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. Hot and angry. "This is it, isn't it?" I asked, my voice trembling. "This proves they premeditated the whole thing. It proves motive," David said, "and it proves malice. But we still need to nail the mechanism of the fraud. We need to break the notary." The deposition of Carla Jennings took place in the conference room of Marjorie Klein's law firm. It was a high-pressure environment designed to intimidate. The table was mahogany. The view was of the city skyline, and the coffee was served in china cups. Carla Jennings sat at the far end of the table. She was a woman in her 40s with nervous hands and hair that had been dyed a harsh, brassy blonde. She wore a suit that looked brand new and ill-fitting. Marjorie Klein sat next to her, looking like a shark in a silk blouse. David sat across from them. I sat next to David, instructed to remain silent and impassive. The court reporter set up her machine. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" she asked. "I do," Carla whispered. David began gently. He asked about her background, her years as a notary, her standard procedures. Carla answered in monosyllables. Glancing at Marjorie Klein after every question, "Let us turn to the events of August 15th, 2025, David said, sliding a copy of the quitclaim deed across the table. "Do you recognize this document?" "Yes," Carla said. "Is that your signature and seal?" "Yes. And does this document state that Sarah Reed personally appeared before you on that date to sign this deed?" "Yes." David leaned forward, clasping his hands on the table. "Ms. Jennings, do you remember Sarah Reed?" Carla looked at me. Her eyes darted away immediately. "I see a lot of people," she mumbled. "It was a year ago. But you are required to verify identity, correct? You would have asked for a driver's license?" "Yes." "Standard procedure. So you are testifying, under oath, that the woman sitting right here, Sarah Reed, stood in front of you on August 15th and signed this paper?" Marjorie Klein cleared her throat. "Objection. Asked and answered. I am testing the witness's recollection," David said calmly. "Ms. Jennings?" "Yes," Carla said, her voice barely audible. She was at the Reed residence. Mr. Reed introduced her. She showed me her ID. She signed it. David nodded slowly. He reached into his briefcase. "That is very interesting. Ms. Jennings, because on August 15th, Sarah Reed was in Chicago." Carla blinked. Marjorie Klein stiffened. "We have credit card receipts for a hotel stay at the Palmer House Hilton," David said, placing a paper on the table. "We have a flight manifest from United Airlines. But most importantly, we have this." He slapped a glossy photograph onto the mahogany surface. "This is a still frame from the security camera in the lobby of the marketing firm where Sarah works. It is time-stamped August 15th at 9 in the morning. She had returned from Chicago early to pick up a laptop." He placed another photo down, and this is a timesheet from her employer, showing she logged into the VPN from the Chicago hotel later that evening. David looked at Carla, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "Unless Sarah Reed has the ability to teleport, she was 300 miles away when you claim she was in Fairmont Heights. So, I am going to ask you one more time, and before you answer, I want you to remember that perjury is a felony that carries a prison sentence. Did Sarah Reed sign this document?" Carla started to shake. She looked at Marjorie Klein, panic rising in her eyes. Marjorie reached out to touch her arm. "We need a break," Marjorie said sharply. "No," David said. "The witness is answering a question." Carla stammered. "Ms. Jennings," David said. "We know Charles Reed hired you. We know he pays you for regular work. If you lie for him now, you are going to jail for him. Is he worth that?" Carla burst into tears. "He told me she signed it," she wailed, burying her face in her hands. Marjorie Klein slammed her notebook shut. "Don't say another word." "Carla?" "He had the paper," Carla cried. Ignoring her lawyer, he met me at the coffee shop. He said it was a family matter. He said Sarah had already signed it, but he forgot to get it notarized and she was out of town. He said he needed it recorded that day for tax reasons. "And you believed him?" David asked relentlessly. "He is Charles Reed," Carla sobbed. "He is a pillar of the community. He seemed trustworthy. He told me it was just a technicality. I didn't think he was stealing it." David sat back in his chair. He looked at me. I looked at the sobbing woman who had helped erase my inheritance. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a sick, heavy exhaustion. "Let the record show," David said to the court reporter, "that the witness has admitted to falsifying the acknowledgement and that the grantor, Sarah Reed, was not present. The deposition was over. The forgery was no longer a theory. It was a fact. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for my parents." Once Carla Jennings' testimony was on the record, the ground shifted beneath everyone's feet. The Marshes, who had been holding out hope that this was just a messy family misunderstanding, realized they were living in a crime scene. 2 days after the deposition, the Marshes filed a cross-claim. They were no longer just defending their title. They were suing Reed Family Holdings, LLC, and Seabrook Coastal Investments, LLC, for fraud, breach of contract, and negligent misrepresentation. They wanted their money back. They wanted damages, and they wanted legal fees. Jason Marsh called me again. "I'm sorry." "Sarah," he said, "you were right. We are going after them. I am not going to let my family be dragged down by your father's greed." The pressure on Charles and Linda was coming from all sides now. The title insurance company was threatening to rescind coverage due to the fraud. The bank was calling the loan, and David hinted that the district attorney in Seabrook had caught wind of the notary's confession and was sniffing around for a potential elder abuse indictment. My parents were cornered, and then Eric called me. "Can we meet?" he asked. His voice sounded small, stripped of the tech bro confidence he usually wore like armor. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop on the edge of town, far away from the country club and the places where people knew our name. When I walked in, Eric was already there. He was sitting at a back table, staring into a black coffee. He looked terrible. He had lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. I sat down across from him. I didn't say hello. He looked up at me. "Sarah, you knew." I said, "It wasn't a question." He nodded, a jerky, painful motion. "I knew." "How long?" "Since December," he said. "Dad told me the plan. He said Grandpa was losing it. He said if Grandpa gave you the condo, it would just sit there. He said you were too sensitive?" I finished for him. "Too emotional to understand the value of an asset?" Eric flinched. "Yeah, that is exactly what they said. They said you lived in a fantasy world. They said I was the one building something real." He ran a hand through his hair. "They made it sound logical." "Sarah, they said the startup needed a bridge loan to get to the Series A. They said selling the condo was the only way to get the liquidity fast enough. They told me that eventually, the family trust would pay you back, that you would be taken care of. And you believed them?" I asked. "I wanted to believe them," he whispered. "I needed the money. I was so scared of failing. I thought if I just went along with it, I could make it right later. When the company went public, I was going to buy you a house, I swear." I looked at my brother. I saw the weakness in him, the desperate need for approval that our parents had cultivated. They had played us against each other perfectly. They had told me I was the responsible one who didn't need anything, and they had told him he was the genius who needed everything. They had used his ambition and my silence to feed their own control. But you didn't buy me a house, Eric. I said, you watched them forge my signature. You watched me grieve for Grandpa while they laughed about locking in the upside. I know, he said, his voice cracking. I know, and I feel sick every day. That is why I sent the text. I couldn't sleep. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I talked to my lawyer. He said, I am done protecting them. If this goes to trial, I will testify. I will tell the judge that Dad planned the sale before Grandpa died. I will tell them about the emails. I looked at the paper. It was a sworn affidavit. Why? I asked. Because you were the only one who didn't treat me like an investment. He said, you were just my sister, and I sold you out. I reached across the table and took his hand. It was shaking. Thank you. Eric, I said. He squeezed my hand, tears standing in his eyes. I am so sorry. Sarah. The trial date was set for early January. The holidays were approaching, but there was no festive atmosphere in Fairmont Heights. The silence from my parents had been absolute for weeks. A cold war of attrition. Then, 3 days before Christmas, they showed up at my apartment. I heard the knock and checked the peephole, seeing them standing in my hallway, looking older and visibly strained, gave me a jolt of panic. But then I remembered the deposition. I remembered the emails. I remembered that I held all the cards. I opened the door, but I did not step aside to let them in. What do you want? I asked. Sarah, please, my mother said. Her voice was trembling, but it lacked the performative quality of the mediation. She looked truly frightened. We need to talk, just for 5 minutes. I looked at my father. He was staring at the floor. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a gray, defeated slump. 5 minutes. I said. I stepped back. They walked into my small living room. They looked out of place among my IKEA furniture and the stacks of books. They stood huddled together, as if the apartment were cold. We want to settle, my father said, without preamble. I talked to David. I said, he told Marjorie Klein our terms, the full value of the condo, plus punitive damages, plus legal fees. We cannot do that. Sarah, my mother said, her voice rising, if we admit to fraud, if this becomes a public record judgment, the district attorney is talking about charges, criminal charges. She reached out, trying to grab my hand. I pulled back. They could send your father to jail. Sarah, for elder abuse, for forgery. He is 65 years old. He has a heart condition. Do you really want to be the daughter who sent her father to prison? I looked at them. They were still doing it, even now, begging for mercy. They were trying to make me responsible for their actions. I didn't forge the deed. Mom, I said, I didn't steal from a dying man. We did it for the family, she cried. Stop saying that, I yelled, my voice echoing off the walls. You did it for yourselves. You did it because you couldn't stand the idea of Grandpa giving me something you couldn't control. My father looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. Sarah, look at the bigger picture, he said. If we go down, the trust goes down, the business goes down, Eric's company. The investors will pull out. You will destroy everything Henry built. Don't you dare talk about Henry, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. He would hate this, my mother sobbed. He would hate seeing his family torn apart like this. He wanted us to be together. He loved us. I walked over to the bookshelf. I picked up the framed photo of me and Henry on the balcony of the condo. We were laughing, windblown, holding mugs of tea. He loved me. I said, he loved me enough to protect me from you. I turned back to them. He wrote a letter. I said, he said he feared you would try to fold everything into your game. He knew exactly who you were, and you proved him right. Sarah, please, my father said, his voice breaking. We are your parents. Then act like it. I said, admit what you did. In open court. We can't, he whispered. It will ruin us. Then you are ruined. I said. I opened the door. Get out. They stood there for a moment, looking at me with a mixture of disbelief and horror. They had spent 30 years training me to be compliant, to be quiet, to be the good girl. They couldn't understand that the good girl was gone, burned away by the fire they had started. My father turned and walked out. My mother looked at me one last time, her face a mask of tragedy. "You will regret this," she whispered. "I don't think I will," I said. I closed the door. I locked the deadbolt. I slid down to the floor, my back against the wood. I was shaking. It was not a triumph. It was a tragedy. They were right about one thing. The family was destroyed. But as I sat there, listening to the silence of my apartment, I realized that the family had been destroyed a long time ago. I was just finally clearing away the wreckage. I picked up my phone and called David. They were here. I said, "Did they offer the full amount?" He asked. "No. They tried to guilt me. They are terrified of jail." "Good," David said. "Keep the pressure on. We go to trial on Monday." I hung up. I looked at the photo of Henry again. "I am almost there." "Grandpa," I whispered. I stood up. I went to the kitchen and made myself a cup of peppermint tea. I drank it standing at the window, looking out at the city lights, feeling a strange, cold peace settle over me. The storm was coming. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the rain. The Seabrook County Courthouse was a building designed for traffic tickets and zoning disputes. Not the dismantling of a dynasty. It was a squat, brick structure that smelled of floor wax and damp wool. But on that Tuesday morning in January, the hallway outside Courtroom 3 was buzzing with an energy that felt electric and dangerous. I arrived with David Harlan at 8:30 in the morning. I wore the same navy suit I had worn to the disastrous mediation, but I felt different inside it. In November, I had been trembling. Today, I felt a cold, hard calcification in my chest. I was no longer the daughter seeking approval. I was the plaintiff seeking blood. The gallery was packed. In a small town like Seabrook Shores, news of a lawsuit involving the Reeds, a forged deed, and the controversial new boardwalk development had spread like wildfire. I saw faces I recognized, members of the Ocean Crest Towers Homeowners Association, the owner of the local bakery where Henry used to buy cinnamon rolls, and even a few reporters from the county paper. Notebooks open, hungry for a story about wealthy people behaving badly. My parents were already seated at the defense table. They looked diminished. My father, usually a man who occupied space with the confidence of a king, sat with his shoulders hunched, whispering furiously to Marjorie Klein. My mother stared straight ahead, her face pale and set like plaster. She did not look at me when I walked in. Eric was sitting in the front row of the gallery, behind the defense table but separated by a distinct gap. He looked sick. He caught my eye and gave a small, jerky nod. I nodded back. He was the only one of them who had shown a shred of conscience, and I knew that his presence here, ready to testify against his own father, was tearing him apart. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Marcus Thorne entered. He was a man with a reputation for impatience with theatrics, and as he surveyed the packed room, his expression was severe. Docket number 4421, Reed v. Reed Family Holdings, et al. He announced. David stood up, ready for the plaintiff. Your Honor. Marjorie Klein stood up, ready for the defense. The trial began not with a bang, but with the slow, methodical laying of bricks. David called me as the first witness. I walked to the witness stand. I placed my hand on the Bible. I swore to tell the truth. I sat down and looked out at the room. I saw Jason and Amanda Marsh sitting in the second row. They looked exhausted, holding hands tightly. They were the collateral damage in this war, and seeing the fear in their eyes made my resolve harden. David guided me through the basics: my name, my relationship to Henry Reed. Tell the court about your grandfather. David said, he was my best friend. I said, I spoke into the microphone. Hearing my own voice echo slightly, he was the only person in my family who didn't care about what I achieved or how much money I made. He just cared about who I was. And did he ever discuss the condo in Seabrook Shores with you? Yes. He called it his sanctuary. He told me he bought it with cash in the 80s because he wanted one thing that wasn't tied up in the business. One thing that was just his. I described the day in the kitchen, the folder, the tea, the way his hands shook when he pushed the deed across the table. He told me he wanted me to have a place where I could breathe. I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. He said he was afraid my parents would try to take it. He used the word vultures. I heard a murmur ripple through the gallery. My father flinched as if he had been slapped. David walked me through the discovery of the sale. The key that didn't fit. The stranger in the doorway. The moment I sat in my car and downloaded the title history. How did you feel when you saw the quitclaim deed? David asked. I felt like I was losing my mind. I said, I looked at the signature, and it looked like mine. For a second, I thought maybe I had signed it and forgotten. That is what my father told me later. That my memory was tricky, that I was confused. I looked directly at Charles Reed. He refused to meet my gaze. But then I realized what it really meant. I continued. It meant that my reality had been rewritten. It meant that the people who were supposed to protect me had looked at me and seen an obstacle. They erased my name. They erased my grandfather's wish. They stole my inheritance not because they needed the money, but because they didn't think I deserved to have it. The courtroom was silent. The only sound was the scratching of the court reporter's machine. Thank you. Ms. Reed, David said. Marjorie Klein declined to cross-examine me. It was a smart move. She knew that attacking me on the stand, with the sympathy of the room clearly on my side, would be suicide. Next, David called Alan Morris. Alan made his way to the stand slowly, leaning heavily on his cane. He looked ancient, a relic from a bygone era of law. But his mind was sharp. He testified about the sealed letter. He read it aloud to the court, his raspy voice giving Henry's words a ghostly weight. It is not part of the trust. It is not part of the business. It is a gift. Judge Thorne leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. Mr. Morris, the judge asked, interrupting David. Why was this letter not filed with the probate court immediately after Henry Reed's death? Alan looked up at the judge. Because Henry asked me to hold it. Your Honor, he hoped that his son would do the right thing. He hoped the deed he signed would be enough. This letter was a failsafe, a break glass in case of emergency measure. He knew his family better than I did. The judge frowned, turning his gaze toward the defense table. So, the testator explicitly anticipated that his heirs would attempt to override his wishes? Yes, Your Honor, Alan said. He specifically feared they would frame his generosity as senility. The judge made a note on his pad. The scratching sound seemed incredibly loud. By the time the lunch recess was called, the atmosphere in the room had shifted from curiosity to judgment. The evidence was piling up. The emails David had entered into evidence, the ones showing Charles discussing the sale months before Henry died, the ones about locking in the upside, were damning. We reconvened at 1 o'clock. David was preparing to call Eric to the stand. I saw Marjorie Klein whisper something to my father. He looked pale, sweating under the fluorescent lights. He shook his head violently. She whispered again, more urgently. She pointed to Eric, then to the judge. My father slumped. He gave a small, defeated nod. Marjorie Klein stood up. Your Honor, she said, her voice smooth but tight. The defense requests a brief recess to confer with plaintiff's counsel. We believe we may be able to reach a resolution. Judge Thorne looked at the clock. You have 30 minutes. Ms. Klein, if you cannot resolve it, we are proceeding with the testimony of Eric Reed, and I suggest you consider that testimony carefully. We met in a small conference room at the back of the courthouse. It was a sterile, windowless box with a scratched laminate table. David and I sat on one side. Marjorie Klein and my parents sat on the other. Marjorie looked composed, but my parents looked like they had been through a war. My mother's eyes were red. My father was staring at his hands. Here is the situation, Marjorie said, abandoning her usual aggressive posture. We know how this looks. It looks like fraud, David said calmly. Because it is fraud. Marjorie held up a hand. We are prepared to offer a comprehensive settlement. We want to end this today. No more testimony, no criminal referrals. Let's hear it, David said. Marjorie slid a document across the table. First, the financial component. My clients will pay Sarah Reed the sum of $1 million. This covers the current market value of the condo, plus significant damages for emotional distress and legal fees. I stared at the table. $1 million? It was a staggering amount of money. It was enough to buy a house. Enough to quit my job. Enough to be free. Second, Marjorie continued, we address the title. The condo remains with the Marshes. We cannot undo the sale without destroying innocent parties. The Marshes keep their home. The lis pendens is removed. I nodded. I had expected this. I didn't want to kick Jason and Amanda out. That wasn't justice. Third, Marjorie said, and this is the non-monetary component. Charles and Linda Reed will establish a charitable foundation. The Henry Reed Coastal Dignity Fund, with an initial endowment of $500,000, the fund will be dedicated to providing legal assistance to seniors facing financial exploitation by family members. Sarah will be named the honorary chairwoman. I looked up, surprised. The fund. It was exactly what Henry would have wanted. It was a legacy. And in exchange? David asked. In exchange? Sarah drops the suit with prejudice. All claims are released. And we sign a confidentiality agreement regarding the specific terms of the settlement. David looked at me. It was a good deal. It was a great deal. It gave me financial security. It protected the Marshes. And it honored Henry. But something was missing. I looked at my parents. They were silent, waiting for me to take the money and go away. They were willing to pay $1.5 million to make this disappear, to buy their way back to respectability. If I took this, they could go back to the country club and spin a story. They could say it was a family misunderstanding. They could say they settled just to help Sarah out. They could pretend the forgery never happened. I couldn't let them do that. I accept the financial terms, I said quietly. And the fund, that is a good idea. My mother let out a breath, a sound of immense relief. But, I said, raising my voice slightly, I will not sign a confidentiality agreement that hides the truth, and I have one condition. Marjorie narrowed her eyes. What condition? I want a statement. I said, a written statement, signed by both of you, filed with the court as part of the public record. What kind of statement? My father asked hoarsely. A statement admitting that you forged my signature. I said, a statement admitting that you knew Henry wanted me to have the condo, and you sold it anyway. I want it in black and white. I want the world to know that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. Absolutely not. My father snapped. That is an admission of guilt. It opens us up to criminal charges. We can structure it to avoid criminal liability. David interjected smoothly. We can frame it as a civil admission of unauthorized signing and disregard of testamentary intent. But Sarah is right. If you want this to end, you have to tell the truth. I won't do it. My father said, it will ruin our reputation. Your reputation is already ruined. Dad, I said, everyone in that courtroom knows what you did. Carla Jennings told the world. Eric is ready to tell the world. You can either admit it on your own terms and end this now, or you can let Eric take the stand and destroy you completely. I leaned forward. I don't want your money as hush money. I want the truth. If you give me the truth, I will sign. If you don't, we go back in there. And I let David ask Eric about the text messages. My father looked at me with pure hatred, but beneath the hatred, there was defeat. He looked at Marjorie. Marjorie sighed. She tapped her pen on the table. We can draft a statement, she said. We acknowledge that we executed documents without Sarah's presence, and contrary to Henry's expressed wishes. We can language it so it satisfies the court but minimizes the criminal exposure. It has to use the word forged, I said, or signed without authorization. Unauthorized execution. Marjorie countered. Fine, I said, as long as it says you did it, and as long as it says Henry wanted me to have it. My father closed his eyes. He nodded. Do it, he whispered. We returned to the courtroom an hour later. The gallery was still full. The air was thick with anticipation. Marjorie Klein stood up. Your Honor, the parties have reached a settlement. Judge Thorne looked surprised, but pleased. He took the document Marjorie handed to the bailiff. He put on his reading glasses and read it in silence. The room was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the vending machines in the hallway. He read for a long time. When he finished, he took off his glasses and looked at my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Reed, please stand. My parents stood up. They looked like schoolchildren being called to the principal's office. I have reviewed the terms of this settlement, the judge said. I see that you have agreed to a significant financial judgment. I see the establishment of a charitable fund, and I see this statement. He held up the piece of paper. We, Charles and Linda Reed, publicly acknowledge that on August 15, 2025, we caused a deed to be executed in Sarah Reed's name without her presence or authorization. We further acknowledge that this action was taken in direct contradiction of the written wishes of Henry Reed, who intended for the property to belong to his granddaughter. The judge lowered the paper. This is a disturbing admission, he said. You are fortunate that the plaintiff has agreed to settle this civilly. If this case had proceeded to a verdict, I would have referred this matter to the district attorney's office immediately. My mother flinched. However, the judge continued, looking at me, the plaintiff has shown a grace that, frankly, based on the evidence, you do not deserve. She has chosen to protect the innocent buyers, the Marshes. She has chosen to honor her grandfather's memory with a charitable fund. He leaned forward, his voice hardening. Let this be a lesson to you, and to everyone in this community. A notary seal is not a decoration, a will is not a suggestion, and the power you hold over your family members is a sacred trust, not a business lever. You used your daughter's name as a tool. You tried to erase her rights for a profit. He paused. There is a saying, Mr. Reed, some wounds money cannot repair. You may have settled the debt today, but you have bankrupted your integrity. He signed the order with a sharp, scratching flourish. Settlement approved. Court is adjourned. The gavel banged. It was over. I stood up. David turned to me and smiled. He shook my hand. You did good, Sarah, he said. I looked across the aisle. My parents were already gathering their things, moving fast, heads down, avoiding eye contact with the reporters who were surging toward the rail. They looked small. They looked like strangers. Jason Marsh pushed through the crowd and walked up to me. Sarah, he said. Jason, I said. Thank you, he said. He looked relieved. Lighter? Thank you for letting us keep the place. Take care of it. I said, it's a good place. The sunset from the balcony it's magic. We will. He promised. Come visit. Seriously. Once the dust settles, I smiled. But I knew I wouldn't go back. That chapter was closed. I walked out of the courthouse into the cold January air. The sun was shining, bright and brittle. I took a deep breath. It smelled of salt and exhaust and freedom. I had $1 million. I had a foundation to build. And most importantly, I had my name back. 6 months later, the summer in Seabrook Shores was humid and sticky, the air thick with the smell of frying clams and sunscreen. I sat on the small patio of my new apartment. It wasn't a beachfront condo. It was a second-floor walk-up in town, above a bakery. It was modest, cluttered with books and plants, but it was mine. I had bought it with my own money, signed the deed with my own hand, and the key turned smoothly in the lock every single time. I was working remotely, consulting for a nonprofit in the city, but my real work was the fund. The Henry Reed Coastal Dignity Fund was up and running. We had already helped 3 seniors recover assets from predatory relatives. It was messy, heartbreaking work, but every time we won, I felt Henry smiling. I hadn't spoken to my parents since the trial. I heard through the grapevine that they had sold the big house in Fairmont Heights and moved to a smaller place in a different county, trying to outrun the whispers. Eric called me sometimes. He was out of the startup game, working a regular job in IT. He was healing. Slowly, the sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the street. I heard footsteps on the stairs. The mail carrier dropped a bundle of letters on my mat. I went inside and picked them up. Bills, a flyer for a pizza place, and a small, cream-colored envelope with no return address. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was elegant, looped script, my mother's handwriting. My stomach gave a little lurch. I hesitated, then sat down on my sofa and opened it. There was no letter, no apology, no check. Inside was a single photograph. It was an old Polaroid. The colors faded to a hazy yellow. It was me. I must have been 3 years old. I was standing on the balcony of the condo at Ocean Crest Towers, wearing a bright red swimsuit and floaties. Henry was kneeling next to me, his arm around my tiny shoulders, pointing out at the ocean. He was laughing, his head thrown back. I was looking up at him with an expression of pure, adoring awe. I had never seen this picture before. I turned it over. On the back, written in black ink, was a short message. "He really did love you." I stared at the words. It wasn't an apology. My mother was incapable of saying "I'm sorry" without a qualification. But it was an admission. She had gone through the old albums. She had found this moment, and she had sent it to me. It was her way of saying that she saw it now. She saw the bond that she had tried to dismiss as senility. She saw the love she had been jealous of. I ran my thumb over the glossy surface of the photo. I looked at Henry's face. I walked out to my little patio. I propped the photo up against a potted basil plant. I sat there as the sky turned purple and the streetlights flickered on. I didn't have the condo. I didn't have my parents. But looking at that picture, at the joy on my grandfather's face, I realized I had everything that mattered. I took a sip of my tea. It was peppermint. "Thanks, Grandpa," I whispered into the salt air. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey through betrayal, justice, and the complexity of family, and I hope Sarah's fight resonated with you. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below letting me know where you are listening from. Are you in the US, Europe, Asia, or somewhere else? If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Revenge Stories for more emotional dramas and tales of justice. Don't forget to share your thoughts on the ending in English in the comments section. Did Sarah make the right choice? I read every comment and can't wait to hear your perspective.